Do you remember that Weird Al song, Amish Paradise?
Weird Al?
Weird Al Yankovic.
That's long before my time.
Okay. It's before her time, but it was kind of a cool song. Anyhow, sometimes we understandably get mistaken for being Amish. Has that happened to you?
Oh yeah, that's actually kind of a trigger for me because when I was younger, maybe more mature, I would react pretty strongly to that. But we do share the same spiritual traditions and baptism.
I'm glad you've come to peace with the Amish question. And I have as well, so. Yeah, but definitely the most striking thing about the Amish, aside from their dress and the reason they're so fascinating to people, is because they refuse to adopt most new technology.
Yeah, and some of that fascination, I think, is perhaps condescension. You know, look at those uneducated, backward people. Isn't it foolish not to make use of modern conveniences?
But I think some of it is actually admiring or maybe even envy, because a lot of folk I know are overwhelmed by the breakneck pace of modern life, caused in large part by modern conveniences, and then also by this glut of often very confusing information that's at our fingertips. And I can imagine many of them looking at the way the Amish live and thinking, you know, wouldn't it be great to live just simply like that, just be off the grid, like in olden times. And I know there's plenty of times I personally feel sick of technology, especially Twitter for some reason.
Right, and I think that might be almost even more appealing as people just get sick and tired of working over Zoom and, you know, in those formats where you're just confined to the online space. I think actually both reactions are too simplistic. People who thoughtlessly adopt new technologies because they're sold on this idea that any new inventions or improvement are going to make their lives better often don't ask themselves the question, what am I losing by doing this? But then on the other hand, rejecting technology because it doesn't fit in with some nostalgic vision of the past also seems wrong. I'm thinking here especially of my mom's sister, my Aunt Rhoda, who recently had a baby called Archer. He's adorable, but he was born with a significant heart defect. 100 years ago, he would have died, but after an operation repairing the hole in his heart, and think about it, an infant's heart is the size of a walnut, that's tiny. He's thriving at this point, and that's only possible through massive advances in medical technology.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. But back to the Amish. Amish suspicion of new technology is based, I think, on legitimate concerns that anything that changes the way they live might attack the fabric of their faith community and lead them astray. So the most obvious example being their use of horse and buggy, because cars, to their way of thinking, by making travel easier, would cause them to live further apart from one another and cause their community to erode. And actually, you might not know this, when the Bruderhof began in the late 1920s, cars were a new technology. And it was something the members at that time discussed. And use of cars was an issue of conscience for them because traffic deaths, which I guess really weren't a thing until that point, unless your horse stampeded, were suddenly killing thousands of people every year. And the folks on the Bruderhof at that time questioned whether the convenience of a car could be justified by this. Now, obviously, we use cars today, but since it's a technology we're used to, maybe we don't think about the trade-offs as much as we should do, both safety and environmental.
So there's a great line in C.S. Lewis that speaks just to that, and it's from Surprised by Joy, where he says, "The truest and most horrible claim made for modern transport is that it annihilates space, because space is among the most wonderful gifts we have." That's something to think about. Anyway, back to the Amish communities. Use of technology, as far as I know, is regulated through a series of rules or Ordnungen. And those are updated as needed. I think the approach we at the Bruderhof have taken to technology has always been more dynamic, and the question is less about preserving a particular way of life and more about how a new technology helps or hinders human flourishing and human relationships. So there is this long, rich history of trying things and then setting them aside, or reducing the use of them when you see what the effects are.
Right. And just by way of example, decades ago, before the internet, probably 30 years, give or take, this robotic welder was installed in the workshop where we manufacture equipment for people with disabilities. It was pretty cutting edge, or so we thought. Of course, I was just a kid, but they gave us a special demonstration. And the idea behind getting this piece of equipment was to eliminate or reduce a job that requires a long training. But then after using it for a year or two, it didn't work out as planned, and the guys running the business got rid of it and developed a rigorous in-house welding training program, which ended up giving young folks an opportunity to learn a valuable skill, and we still don't have a robotic welder to this day.
That's a really great story that I wasn't aware of. But I think it highlights the fact that we don't have hard and fast rules about living without technology. And instead, we try to use technology in a considered way. Just by way of another example, the negative aspects of social media, its effect on mental health, sleep deprivation, reduced real-time social interaction are so well documented and so obvious that most people on the Bruderhof aren't active on social media. But since we do live in the 21st century and there are places where you need a social media account for school or for work or for connecting as an organization with other people and groups, we don't have a rule per se against social media, but we've all agreed to radically limit what we use it for.
Right.
And it's just a big waste of time.
It's a huge waste of time.
It's narcissism.
Yes, I'm guilty of some of that.
Oh boy, I'm sorry.
And I know YouTube isn't really considered social media,
Right.
but I just saw this, or heard, I think it may have been a podcast, this insane figure that altogether people are watching 1 billion hours of video on YouTube a day. That's over 114,800 years every single day.
Okay, so we shouldn't contribute too much more to that and wrap this video up. I think the most important thing to remember is that technology, whether it's a labor-saving device or a smartphone, is never just a tool. If by that you mean it's a neutral thing.
Right, because tools are never neutral. They change the way you interact with the world.
And the change is mostly not completely positive or completely negative. The question to me is the net effect. And it also depends on what we consider to be modern technology. Remember, even a hammer was cutting edge at one point.
I remember those days.
So I don't think we'll ever be able to answer the big philosophical questions like, does technology make us more alone? Or can you live without technology? But we can adopt a mindful approach to what makes our lives better. Another way to think about it is to keep in mind what it is that makes life good, which is person-to-person relationships, and then adopt or reject technology to the degree that it improves or impairs those relationships.
And to the degree that it leaves you time to connect with the real world, with the rhythms of natural life, and, for example, raise a bunch of cows. Word to the wise, if you want to find true peace, just spend some time watching cows go about their lives. It's very Amish of me, I know, but it's truthful.
I'll take your word for it.
Thank you.